If I had a magic wand and could give every person one skill, it would be the ability to shift their nervous system on command out of a survival stress response and into homeostasis, which is our relaxation response, which sounds a bit boring, I know, because, it's not learning to fly or becoming invisible, but this is a skill, which is the skill which you learn in rapid relaxation sessions. This skill of shifting yourself out of a stress response and into a state of calm on command is a skill which I know would change everybody's lives pretty significantly for the better, which I know is quite a bold statement, but in this video I will try to explain why that is. So here's a tiny bit of the science. So our autonomic nervous system, which is responsible for governing lots of crucial functions in the body and can hugely affect our state of mind, this system has two primal states of operation. Primal meaning very deeply ingrained in our evolutionary design. And these two modes of operation are safety and survival. So safety is our dominant state when our nervous system registers that we're safe. And in this safety state, we're calm and our body is in homeostasis, so everything is functioning optimally. And really importantly, and quite often overlooked, in this state, we have access to all of the most crucial creative centers in the brain. And these are the regions of the brain which govern problem solving, decision making, emotional regulation, motivation, empathy, and reasoning. So being in this safety state gives us access to all of that extremely important stuff. Our other state is what's called our survival state, which is activated anytime our nervous system perceives a potential threat, and it primes our mind and body to either run away from or fight against or freeze in the face of that threat. Now, the experience of being in a survival response will probably be quite familiar to you because it's all of the standard symptoms of stress, because stress is our survival response. It's your body and mind perceiving something that it's interpreting as potentially threatening in any way, and it's trying to help you by getting really revved up. So it often feels like either one or a number of the following, and sometimes quite subtle versions of these, sometimes a lot more pronounced. So it's things like shortened breath and breathing mainly from the chest or upper chest, an increased heart rate, so that kind of pounding heart, muscular tension, so it can be general tension in the whole body or concentrated tension in particular areas to the point of discomfort, around the shoulders or the back or the neck or anywhere. And it can feel like a knot in the tummy or kind of, churning in the tummy or maybe even nausea. And psychologically, it looks like sometimes it's sort of quite erratic thinking because your focus is darting around a lot, essentially searching for threats, or excessive tunnel vision on a problem and not being able to widen your perspective enough to actually effectively and logically deal with that problem. And if you're triggered into a survival response when you're communicating with someone, then that might translate as having a very sort of shaky voice and kind of, tripping over your words, or an overly, possibly aggressive or more heated, more reactive, or more emotional response where you just snap. So those are our two primal modes of operation. We've got safety and survival. Now, our evolutionary design is that we're in a safety state the majority of the time and only access our survival response in the face of physical threats or in situations where you need to be really fast or really strong. However, because of a multitude of factors, the majority of us are in a survival response, in a stress response, way more than we should be, or that it's healthy or helpful or sustainable to be, which can cause us all sorts of problems. And a big part of the reason for this is because it doesn't take a real life threat to your survival to activate your survival stress response. All it takes is for your nervous system to either consciously or unconsciously perceive something as potentially threatening. And that means in any way threatening. So in our modern civilized society, it's very often fired up multiple times a day, if not multiple times an hour, or in some cases almost permanently switched on. So it can be triggered when you're running late in the morning, or when you get an annoying email, or when you have to have a difficult conversation with a colleague, or someone cuts you off in traffic, or if you're experiencing financial pressures or worries, you name it. And it can also be triggered by the simple fact of doing something new, because our brains have, through evolutionary design, quite intelligently come to interpret anything that is unknown as potentially threatening, because we don't know. So we can't be sure, so better to be activated for survival just in case, which is why we get quite nervous before we do something new. And then I think one of the most frustrating triggers of our survival response can also be unconscious fears. So that could be quite literally anything that your brain has come to interpret or associate with being threatening since infancy. So this is where some of our more mysterious kind of fears and phobias often come from. So these sorts of fears, these triggers, are caused by something that your infant brain interpreted as scary or threatening, which has never been sufficiently disputed or kind of corrected in the brain. So sometimes we know what these fears are, and sometimes we don't. We actually just know that we were wandering along having a perfectly nice day, and then you can just tell that something has thrown you off and that your stress response has been activated, and you don't know why necessarily. So these are just a few of the delightful things that can trigger our survival response. But ultimately what all of this means is that we are very, very often operating in a survival response when we would be much better off in a safety or relaxation response. Because remember, in safety, we're calm, we can stay focused with sustained attention, and we're frankly just more intelligent, more creative, and more resourceful. So what do we do? And this is where relaxation comes in, because when we relax, this physiologically signals to our nervous system that we're safe. So it activates that safety response. So the aim is not to become, you know, all floppy and sort of sleepy and super like relaxed and sedated all the time. The aim is to use relaxation techniques to teach our body how to go into this safety state. And once we've got that down, which is a learnable, buildable skill, we create a neural connection in the brain using simple focus and repetition between this state of safety and a trigger or a cue, which is usually a word or phrase or image or something symbolic or a gesture. So this means that day to day, when you feel that off-putting stress response kind of kicking in and throwing you off your game, you can trigger your safety response so that you're operating in a calm and focused and creative state and not stressed out and fired up and kind of reactive one. And the reason I call this technique a superpower is because just imagine that you could face all of the challenges of life, because, you know, let's face it, they just keep coming. But you could face them in a calm and mentally resourceful state. So you could try all the scary new things, excuse me, you could take chances in new situations. You know, you could nail all of those interviews and have all of the uncomfortable conversations and just face things that would generally rattle you, but in a calm and creative state. It's just such an immense game changer for life. I personally use it quite a lot during challenging parenting moments. You know, quite often if there's a meltdown happening, I think I used it in the supermarket yesterday actually, or when I'm running late, or if I'm in a new social situation, you know, and I feel a bit nervous. And I've also learned to use it when I feel the urge to people please, because at the root of most people-pleasing behaviours is usually an unconscious fear of judgment or conflict or rejection or abandonment. And again, even though none of those things are technically life-threatening, they're enough to activate that stress response. So I've learned to trigger calm when I need to establish a boundary or advocate for myself. And I do find that one of the first things that goes for me when I'm in a stress response are my words. So I find it really, really difficult to articulate myself. And that was always, you know, quite a frustrating mystery to me. But it turns out that stress is directly linked to what's called reduced linguistic complexity, meaning it literally limits your use of language. So, you know, not great for communication. And the other amazing thing about shifting your state when you're communicating with people is that it means that you can be yourself. Because I heard it put quite recently that safety is a vehicle for authenticity, which sounds a bit cheesy, but it's true, because you're never fully yourself unless your system feels safe and safe enough to relax. So it's really useful for things like social anxiety and for just all types of interpersonal communication, you know, so that you can create meaningful and authentic and real connections with people, because we just can't do that when our system is primed for survival and self-defense, because we're in a stress response. So whatever the stressor that you're facing, being able to trigger a state of calm so that your nervous system registers that you are safe, you know, and that this might be a tricky situation, but it's not life or death, and you can problem solve your way through it, because you're safe to do so, that's always going to lead to a better outcome. And the same goes for trying new things, or whenever you're facing the unknown. I think fear tends to stop us from doing a lot of things that we would probably be better off doing. And with a tool like this, you can shift from fear to calm, and it means you can approach things like change or the unknown with, very differently. And as I said, I truly think that that is a superpower. So if you'd like to try it, please get in touch. The method is fairly straightforward, and it's usually quite a nice experience going through and learning the technique, and the results are pretty quick. So I hope to see you soon and help you install this superpower and see what you do with it.